37 miles. That was the exact distance from the desolate stretch of highway where he left me to the front door of the house I paid for. It was pouring rain that night, a storm so violent, it felt like the sky was trying to wash the sins off the earth. My husband rolled down the window and the cold water hit my face. He smiled a cruel, twisted smile I had never seen before and said, "You need a lesson in respect, Keisha, so walk home and think about who puts food on your table." He watched me step out into the mud in my heels. He watched me shiver. Then he drove away. The taillights of his sedan faded into the darkness, leaving me alone. He thought he had broken me. He thought this was the moment I would crumble and beg. He was wrong. He did not know that 5 minutes later, a black Cadillac Escalade would pull up. He did not know my head of security would step out holding a dry umbrella. And he certainly did not expect that the shivering wife he left behind was actually the owner of the company he worked for. This is the story of how my husband made the biggest mistake of his life. My name is Keisha, and sitting here in my penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline, it is hard to believe that just last week I was playing the role of the submissive wife. I sip my wine and look at the empty seat across from me. It is peaceful now, but my heart still races when I think about the car ride that started it all. We were driving back from his company mixer. The windshield wipers were slapping back and forth, frantically fighting a losing battle against the storm. Inside the car, the silence was heavy and suffocating. I pressed myself against the passenger door, trying to make my body take up as little space as possible. That had been my strategy for 3 years of marriage. Shrink down. Be quiet. Be invisible. But tonight, even invisibility was not enough. Derek gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were ashen. I could hear his breathing heavy and ragged like a bull getting ready to charge. Finally, he exploded. "You humiliated me, Keisha." His voice wasn't loud yet, but it carried a vibration that made my stomach turn. I turned to him, keeping my voice soft and steady. "I do not know what you mean, Derek. I just sat there like you asked." He slammed his hand on the dashboard, making me jump. "Do not play dumb with me. You fixed my tie. In front of the vice president. In front of Mr. Henderson. You reached out and fixed my tie like I was a toddler who cannot dress himself." I stared at him in disbelief. His tie had been crooked. I had simply reached out to straighten it because I wanted him to look perfect. I wanted him to get that promotion he had been obsessing over. "I was just trying to help you look your best," I whispered. "Help me." He laughed, and it was a dry, bitter sound that lacked any humor. "I am the top sales manager in the district. I bring in the money. I pay the bills. I do not need help from a receptionist who spends her day answering phones and filing papers. You did that to undermine me. You wanted Henderson to see that you wear the pants. You wanted to emasculate me in front of the white executives." The accusation was so absurd I almost laughed, but I knew better. Derek was insecure. He was a small man, constantly terrified that the world would find out he wasn't as big as he pretended to be. And tonight, his fragility had reached a breaking point. The rain hammered against the roof of the car, louder and louder, matching the rising volume of his voice. "You think you are so smart because you read your little books," he spat out. "But you forget your place. You are nothing without me, Keisha. You are just a burden I carry out of charity." I bit my lip so hard I tasted copper. I wanted to scream that I wasn't a receptionist. I wanted to tell him that while he was playing sales manager, I was running a private equity firm that had just acquired his division. I wanted to tell him that the suit he was wearing was paid for by my dividends, not his salary. But I couldn't. Not yet. The plan wasn't ready, so I swallowed my pride. "I am sorry, Derek, it won't happen again." "That is right, it won't happen again." Suddenly he swerved the car. The tires screeched against the wet asphalt as he yanked the wheel to the right. My seatbelt locked tight against my chest, bruising my collarbone as the car fishtailed on the slick road. He didn't just slow down. He slammed on the brakes, bringing us to a violent halt right in the middle of the breakdown lane. The hazard lights clicked on flashing yellow against the pitch-black night. He unlocked the doors and turned to me. The look in his eyes was cold and dead. "Get out." Before I could even reach for the door handle, Derek was already there. He yanked the passenger door open with enough force that the hinges groaned in protest against the wind. The storm instantly invaded the car, bringing with it a freezing spray that soaked the leather seats. He did not wait for me to step out. He grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into my flesh with a bruising grip, and pulled. I was not prepared for the violence of it. My heel caught on the edge of the floor mat, and I stumbled out of the car, unable to find my footing on the slick asphalt. I hit the ground hard. The gravel on the shoulder of the highway tore through my stockings and bit into the skin of my knees. The pain was sharp and immediate, but the shock of the freezing rain was worse. It felt like 1,000 needles piercing my skin. I gasped, trying to push myself up, but before I could regain my balance, a heavy object landed in the mud next to my face. It was my handbag. Derek had thrown it from the car, with the casual disregard one might have for a bag of trash. It splashed into a puddle of oily water, ruining the leather instantly. He stood over me, shielding his eyes from the rain but making no move to help. In the headlights of a passing truck, I saw his face. There was no regret there, only a terrifying satisfaction. He looked like a man who finally felt powerful. "You want to act like you run things, Keisha. Then you can manage your own transportation," he shouted, his voice cracking over the roar of the thunder. "Walk home and think about who pays the mortgage. Think about who allows you to live indoors. By the time you get back, maybe you will remember your place is serving me, not embarrassing me in public." He looked at me, shivering in the mud one last time, and sneered. "You look pathetic. That is what you are without me. Pathetic." He turned his back on me and climbed back into the driver's seat. The door slammed shut, sealing him inside his warm, dry bubble of delusion. I heard the lock click. The engine revved, a sound of pure aggression, and the car peeled away. The tires spun on the wet pavement, spraying a final wave of dirty water over me before the vehicle shot forward. I watched the red taillights shrink into the distance, getting smaller and smaller until the darkness swallowed them completely. For a moment, there was only the sound of the rain drumming against the earth and the distant hum of traffic. I was 37 miles from home. I was bleeding. I was soaked to the bone. Any other woman would have been hysterical. Any other woman would have curled into a ball and cried until someone stopped to help. But as I stared into the void where my husband had vanished, something inside me snapped. It was not a break of fragility, but the breaking of a dam. I slowly pushed myself up from the ground, ignoring the stinging in my palms. I reached down and picked up my ruined bag, wiping the mud off the gold clasp. My shivering began to subside, not because the air was getting warmer, but because a cold, focused rage was spreading through my veins, replacing the fear. I brushed a wet strand of hair from my face and stood tall in the middle of the storm. My eyes, which moments ago were filled with shock, now hardened into steel. He wanted to teach me a lesson about power. He had no idea that he had just handed the weapon of his own destruction to the only person who knew all his secrets. The crying wife was gone. The predator had just woken up. 5 minutes. That was how long I stood in the darkness before the horizon began to glow. It was not the sun rising, but the piercing xenon headlights of a black Cadillac Escalade cutting through the storm. It was followed by a second vehicle, an SUV that looked more like a tank than a civilian transport. They moved with the precision of a military operation, slowing down exactly where I stood. The lead vehicle came to a halt, and before the wheels stopped rolling, the back door flew open. A man stepped out into the deluge. He did not run. He did not hunch his shoulders against the rain. He walked with the calm, terrifying efficiency of a man who had seen combat. He snapped open a large black umbrella and held it over my head, shielding me from the downpour. "Good evening, madam." Marcus, my head of security, looked at my muddied dress and bleeding knees without flinching. To him, I was not the pathetic wife dumped on the roadside. I was the founder and CEO of Phoenix Capital, one of the most aggressive private equity firms in Chicago. I was the woman who signed his paychecks, which were substantial enough to buy the loyalty of a small army. I stepped into the back seat of the Escalade, sinking into the heated leather. The silence inside was absolute, instantly cutting off the roar of the storm. Marcus slid into the seat opposite me, handing me a warm towel and a tablet. "The penthouse is ready," he said, tapping the screen. "I have a team on standby to retrieve your belongings from the house tomorrow. We can have divorce papers served by noon." I wiped the mud from my face, staring at the digital reflection in the dark window. The warmth of the car was seducing me. It would be so easy to go to the penthouse, to soak in a marble tub, to never see Derek again until we were in court. But easy was not how I built my empire. Easy would let him get away with half of everything he did not earn. Easy would mean he only lost a wife, not his freedom. "No," I said, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. Marcus paused, his finger hovering over the GPS. "Pardon me, madam. Take me back to the house." Marcus frowned, the first crack in his professional mask. "With all due respect, that is dangerous. The man is unstable. You are safe now." "Why go back into the line of fire?" "Because he thinks he won," I replied, dropping the towel. "He thinks I am walking home right now crying and terrified. He expects a broken woman to walk through that door, and that is exactly who I am going to give him. If I leave now, I am just a wife leaving a marriage. But if I go back, I can get access to his laptop. I can get the bank transfers. I can get everything I need to ensure that when I leave him, he does not just lose me, he loses his job, his reputation, and his freedom." I looked at Marcus, my eyes burning with a cold fire. "I do not want a divorce, Marcus. I want an audit. I want to liquidate him." Marcus looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly, a hint of a smile touching his lips. He tapped his earpiece. "Change of plans. We are returning to the residence. Drop-off point is 2 blocks away. Madam wants to walk the rest of the way." He opened a hidden compartment and pulled out a dry set of clothes identical to the ones I was wearing, but clean. "You might want to change," he said, "but if you are playing the victim, maybe keep the mud." I looked down at my ruined dress. "No, I will keep the mud. It will make the performance more convincing. Let us go." The convoy made a U-turn on the slick highway, heading back toward the suburb where my husband was currently celebrating his victory. He thought he had taught me a lesson. He was about to learn that you never leave a shark alive in the water. The heated leather seat of the Escalade was the hardest thing to leave. Marcus handed me the bag containing my original clothes. My team had dampened them just enough to mimic the aftermath of a storm without risking hypothermia, but pulling the cold, clammy fabric over my skin felt like sliding into a corpse. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. The powerful CEO vanished. The tired, beaten wife returned. I messed up my hair, smudged my mascara to simulate crying, and stepped out onto the wet pavement 2 blocks from the house. Marcus watched me with a look of grim respect. I nodded once, signaling him to fade into the shadows, and began the walk. The wind was biting, cutting through the thin fabric of my dress, but the physical cold was nothing compared to the burning nausea in my stomach. I hated this. I hated shrinking myself to fit into his small, fragile ego. Every step toward that house felt like a betrayal of the woman I had worked so hard to become. But I reminded myself that a hunter must sometimes wear the skin of the prey to get close enough to strike. The house loomed ahead, a cookie-cutter suburban box that Derek was so proud of. The lights were on in the living room. He was probably watching the game, drinking the scotch I bought, completely unbothered by the fact that he had left his wife to die on a highway. I reached the porch, my hands trembling not from cold, but from the effort of suppressing my rage. I took a deep breath, forcing my shoulders to slump, forcing my eyes to look hollow and defeated. I raised my fist and knocked. 1 minute passed. Then 2. He was making me wait. He wanted me to stand in the cold just a little longer, just to prove he could. Finally, the lock clicked. The door swung open, revealing Derek. He was dry, warm, and wearing his favorite lounge pants. He held a glass of amber liquid in one hand and looked me up and down with an expression of supreme arrogance. There was no relief in his eyes, no guilt, only the smug satisfaction of a master whose runaway dog had returned to the kennel. "I see you finally decided to stop throwing a tantrum," he said, leaning against the doorframe without moving to let me in. I lowered my head, staring at his slippers. "I am sorry, Derek," I whispered the lie, tasting like ash in my mouth. My phone died. I walked as fast as I could. He swirled his drink, savoring the moment. "Well, at least you know the way home. I hope you had time to think about your attitude while you were out there." A wife supports her husband, Keisha. She does not try to outshine him. You needed a reminder of who protects you, who provides for you. He stepped back, leaving the door open, and turned around to walk back toward the couch. He didn't offer a towel. He didn't ask if I was hurt. He just assumed I would follow him back into servitude. "Come inside before you let the draft in," he called out over his shoulder, not even looking back. I stepped across the threshold and closed the door softly behind me. The lock clicked into place. He thought he had let a broken woman back into his house. He was wrong. He had just locked himself in with his executioner. The sun was streaming through the blinds when Derek finally rolled over. I had been awake for hours, lying perfectly still and staring at the ceiling while he snored with the heavy, satisfied rhythm of a man with a clear conscience. To him, last night was just a domestic dispute that he had won. To me, it was the beginning of a war. He stretched his arms above his head and yawned, scratching his chest as he looked at me. There was no apology in his eyes. Instead, he looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance, as if I were an unruly child who had finally settled down. "You really scared me last night, Keisha," he said, sitting up and reaching for his glass of water. "Walking off like that, just because you could not handle a little criticism. You have a drama problem. You know that, right?" I sat on the edge of the bed, forcing my hands to remain unclenched in my lap. "I did not walk off, Derek. You threw me out." He laughed, shaking his head as he stood up. "See, that is exactly what I am talking about. You always twist things to make yourself the victim. I told you to get out so you could cool off. I expected you to stand by the car and apologize. But no, you had to take off running into the dark like a crazy woman. I barely slept a wink worrying about you." The lie was so bold it almost impressed me. He had slept 8 solid hours. I knew because I had watched him the entire time, mapping out his destruction while he dreamed. He walked over to the dresser and picked up his wallet. He pulled out a crumpled $20 bill and tossed it at me. It fluttered through the air and landed on the duvet near my leg. "Go get us some breakfast. Get those bagels from the place on 4th Street. And get me a large coffee. Black. Do not mess it up like last time." He did not ask. He commanded. He treated me not like a wife, but like a servant he had graciously decided not to fire. "And keep the change," he added, waving his hand dismissively as he headed toward the bathroom. "Maybe you can buy yourself some better makeup. You look tired." I picked up the bill. The paper felt dirty in my hand. This man was throwing $20 at a woman who managed a portfolio worth billions. He thought he was being generous. I stood up, smoothing down the oversized t-shirt I was wearing. "Yes, Derek," I said, my voice flat. He disappeared into the bathroom, and a moment later I heard the shower running. I was about to turn toward the door when a buzzing sound stopped me. Derek had left his phone on the nightstand. It was face up. I usually respected his privacy, not out of trust but out of indifference. But today was different. I took a step closer. The screen lit up with a notification. It was not a text from his boss. It was not a sports update. It was a message from a contact saved only as Baby Boo. The message was short, but it told me everything I needed to know. "Did you finally get rid of the headache, or is she still breathing?" I stared at the screen as the words burned themselves into my retinas. He had not just abandoned me on the highway. He had an audience. Someone else knew. Someone else was laughing. I looked toward the bathroom door, listening to him humming a tune under the water. He was washing away the guilt, but he could not wash away the digital footprint. I reached for the phone. I had about 10 minutes before he finished his shower. That was 9 minutes more than I needed to clone his SIM card. The sound of the shower was a steady roar, a white noise that masked the frantic beating of my heart. I had 3 minutes. Maybe less if he decided to skip conditioning his thinning hair. I picked up the phone. The screen was cool against my sweating palm. Swipe up, enter passcode. I tried his birthday. Incorrect. I tried our anniversary. Incorrect. Of course. Why would he use the date he married a woman he despised? I paused, thinking like Derek. What did he love most in the world? Himself. I typed in the date of his first big promotion. 0512. The lock icon snapped open. I did not waste a second scrolling through his texts. That was amateur hour. I needed total access. I opened the browser and typed in a secure IP address Marcus had provided me months ago for emergency corporate audits. A black screen appeared with a single green download bar. Initiate mirror protocol. I tapped yes. The download started, 20%. I glanced at the bathroom door. Steam was seeping out from the crack at the bottom. 40%. I heard him humming again. A happy tune. The song of a man who thought he had gotten away with murder. 60%. The humming stopped. The water pressure changed. The pipes groaned as the faucet was turned off. Panic spiked in my chest like a physical blow. He was done early, 75%. I heard the shower curtain rings screech across the metal rod. He was stepping out. Keisha, he shouted. Where is my blue towel? 85%. I put it in the cabinet under the sink. I yelled back, my voice remarkably steady. It is not here. I heard his wet footsteps slapping against the tile floor. He was walking toward the door. 95%. Check the bottom shelf, I shouted, willing the progress bar to move faster. The doorknob turned. Installation complete. The words flashed on the screen for a microsecond before the app icon vanished, burying itself deep in the system root directory. I locked the screen, wiped the glass on my shirt to remove my fingerprints, and set it back on the nightstand exactly 2 inches from the edge, just as he had left it. The bathroom door flew open. A cloud of steam rolled out, followed by Derek, a towel wrapped loosely around his waist. He looked at me, then at the nightstand. What are you doing standing there? He asked, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. I picked up the laundry basket from the floor. Just getting your dirty clothes, I said, forcing a look of dull obedience. He grunted, accepting the lie because it fit his worldview of me as the maid. He reached for his phone. My breath hitched. He unlocked it. He swiped. If the phone lagged, if there was a glitch, he would know. He frowned. Weird, he muttered. What? I asked, gripping the laundry basket. Battery drained 2% just sitting here. He shrugged and tossed it onto the bed. Piece of junk. He did not know that the piece of junk was now recording his GPS location keystrokes and ambient audio. He did not know that every word he whispered to Baby Boo would be streamed directly to my private server. The trap was not just set, it was armed. I nodded silently, clutching my purse, and stepped out onto the cracked sidewalk. I watched him drive away, feeling the familiar exhaust fumes wash over me. He thought he was teaching me humility. He was actually giving me freedom. As soon as his bumper vanished around the corner, my posture changed. I straightened my spine. I took a deep breath of the city air and signaled to the black sedan parked across the street. It was not a taxi. It was a Maybach with tinted windows so dark they looked like oil spills. Marcus opened the rear door and I slid into the back seat, shedding the cheap pilling cardigan I wore for Derek. Underneath, I was wearing a silk blouse that cost more than Derek's car. I swapped my scuffed flats for the Louboutin heels stored in the center console. The transformation took 30 seconds. The mouse was gone. The lioness had returned. Take me to the tower, Marcus, I said, checking my reflection in the vanity mirror, and call the acquisition team. Tell them to meet me in the war room. The elevator ride to the 45th floor of the Phoenix Capitol building was the only moment of peace I had. When the doors opened, the hum of the office stopped. Heads turned. Junior analysts scrambled to look busy. They knew that when I walked in with that specific look in my eyes, someone was about to lose their job or their company. I did not stop at my desk. I marched straight into the conference room, where 5 of the best forensic accountants in the country were already waiting. I did not sit down. I stood at the head of the mahogany table and projected a photo of Derek's company logo on the screen. "We are acquiring this firm," I announced, my voice echoing in the silent room. "But before we sign the papers, I want a deep dive into their sales division, specifically the accounts managed by a Mr. Derek Wilson. I want to know every penny that has moved through his hands in the last 5 years. Tear it apart." The room erupted into the sound of typing. It took them less than an hour. My lead analyst, a young genius named David, slid a tablet across the table toward me. His face was pale. "Madam, you need to see this," he said. "We were looking for minor discrepancies, but we found something much bigger. We found a series of phantom invoices. Money is being funneled out of the company accounts into a shell corporation." I looked at the numbers. They were staggering. "The IP address used to authorize the transfers matches the one from your home Wi-Fi," David continued nervously. I smiled. Derek was not just a cheater. He was a thief. He was stealing millions from the very company he wanted to lead. And he was stupid enough to do it from his living room. By 6 o'clock, the wolf had put on her sheep costume. I was standing in the kitchen stirring a pot of beef stew that smelled like forgiveness. The expensive suit I had worn to Phoenix Capital was hidden in the very back of the closet behind a row of winter coats. I wore gray yoga pants and a stained t-shirt. My hair was pulled back in a messy bun. I looked exactly like the woman Derek thought he owned. When the front door opened, I did not flinch. I did not look up with the eyes of a CEO who had just ordered a forensic audit of her husband's embezzlement. I looked up with the eyes of a wife hoping for a crumb of affection. He walked in with a swagger I had not seen in years. Usually he dragged his feet burdened by the weight of his own mediocrity. But today he bounced. He held a bouquet of flowers behind his back like a character in a bad sitcom. Guess who he sang out? He revealed the flowers with a flourish. They were carnations. They were dyed a violent shade of artificial blue that did not exist in nature. The price sticker from the gas station was still stuck to the crinkled plastic wrapper. "For my beautiful girl," he said, handing them to me with a grin that showed too many teeth. "I feel bad about last night. I was stressed. You know how it is." I took the bouquet. My phone buzzed silently in my apron pocket. It was a transaction alert from the spyware I had installed that morning. Gas station mart. $12.99. Paid for with the company credit card he had reported lost 3 months ago. He was buying me apology flowers with money he stole from the company I owned. The irony was so rich I could taste it. I brought the flowers to my nose and inhaled the scent of fraud. "They are lovely, Derek," I said, forcing a smile. "Thank you for thinking of me." He patted my head as if I were a golden retriever. "I had a big day today, Keisha," he said, walking past me to the refrigerator. "Huge moves. Management is finally seeing my potential. I think a massive bonus is coming soon." I watched him chug milk directly from the carton. I knew exactly what kind of bonus was coming. It was a federal indictment. But I kept my voice soft. "That is wonderful, honey. You deserve it." We ate dinner in relative silence. He talked about himself. He talked about the new car he wanted to buy. He talked about how stupid his current boss was. I nodded and chewed, swallowing my rage with every bite of potato. When he finished, he pushed his plate away and leaned back in his chair, picking his teeth. The mood in the room shifted instantly. The fake warmth evaporated. "By the way, clear your schedule for Sunday." I paused with my fork halfway to my mouth. "Sunday. We are going to Mama's house," he announced. My stomach tightened. His mother's house was not a home. It was a courtroom where I was always on trial and the verdict was always guilty. "Mama wants the whole family there," he continued. "Jessica and her husband are coming. And listen to me, Keisha." He leaned forward, pointing a grease-stained finger at my face. His eyes went dark. "Do not embarrass me this time. I do not want a repeat of the Christmas party. Wear something nice. Do not sit in the corner looking depressed. And for God's sake, if Jessica makes a joke, just laugh. Do not be sensitive. You are representing me. Do you understand? I looked at the man who had abandoned me in the rain and was now demanding my obedience. I looked at the blue carnations wilting on the counter. I lowered my eyes to hide the predator lurking inside them. Yes, Derek, I understand. I will be on my best behavior. He nodded, satisfied with his control. Good. Now clean this up. I have big business to plan. He left the room whistling. I sat alone in the kitchen listening to the water drip in the sink. Sunday. The whole family. Jessica. Mama Louise. They thought they were inviting a victim to their slaughter. They had no idea they were inviting the executioner to dinner. Mama Louise lived in a cramped bungalow that always smelled of overcooked collard greens and pine cleaner. It was a smell that used to make me nauseous, but today it smelled like opportunity. Derek parked his sedan on the cracked driveway next to a flashy leased BMW that belonged to his younger brother Kevin. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, fixing his tie for the 10th time. Showtime, Keisha, he muttered, unlocking the doors. Remember what I told you. Smile. I pasted a plastic smile on my face and followed him up the porch steps. The screen door was already open, and the noise of the television blaring a football game spilled out onto the street. We stepped inside, and the heat hit me instantly. The house was stiflingly hot, a mix of too many bodies in a small space and the oven running full blast. There is my big shot, Mama Louise shouted from the recliner. She did not get up. She extended her arms toward Derek like he was a returning war hero. Derek strode over and kissed her cheek, handing her the cheap blue carnations I had trimmed earlier. For the best mother in the world, he announced loud enough for everyone to hear. Mama Louise beamed, clutching the flowers to her chest. She looked at me standing by the door, holding the heavy casserole dish I had baked. Her smile vanished instantly, replaced by a critical squint. You are late, Keisha, she snapped. The cornbread is already cold. Put that down and get in the kitchen. Auntie Sarah needs help with the ham. And do not think you are sitting down to eat until every man in this house has a full plate. Yes, Mama Louise, I said, keeping my head low. I walked past the living room toward the kitchen. Kevin was shouting at the TV. And there, sitting on the plastic-covered sofa right next to the fan, was Jessica. Jessica was Kevin's wife. She was blonde, petite, and currently holding a glass of sweet tea with her pinky finger extended. She was not in the kitchen. She was not helping. She was a guest of honor simply because she was white, and Mama Louise thought Kevin had married up. She saw me approaching and offered a tiny wave without shifting her position. Hey, Keisha, she chirped. I stopped. I was wearing a modest dress that Derek had approved, but next to Jessica, who was wearing a pastel sundress, I looked like the help. Hello, Jessica, I said, shifting the heavy dish in my hands. How are you? Oh, I am just exhausted, she sighed dramatically, leaning back against the cushions. Planning the baby shower is so stressful. You are so lucky you do not have to worry about things like that. The room went quiet for a split second. It was a direct hit at my childlessness, but I did not flinch. I just tightened my grip on the casserole. I am sure it is very hard work, I said neutrally. I turned to go into the kitchen, but Jessica's voice stopped me again. It was loud, clear, and laced with fake concern. Actually, wait a second, Keisha. Come closer. I hesitated, then took a step toward the sofa. Jessica tilted her head, studying my face with the scrutiny of a dermatologist. Wow, she said, shaking her head. I was just telling Kevin that you guys must be going through a rough patch financially, but I did not realize it was this bad. You look so drained. She took a sip of her tea and gave me a pitying smile that was sharp enough to cut glass. Seriously, Keisha, what happened to you? You are aging so fast. You look 10 years older than Derek now. Is everything okay, or is the stress just finally cracking you? Before I could answer her question about my stress levels, Jessica clapped her hands together as if remembering something delightful. Oh, that reminds me. I did not just come here to eat ham. I brought you a little something. She reached behind the sofa and pulled out a large black plastic garbage bag. The sound of the plastic crinkling cut through the room, silencing the football game for a moment. She tossed the bag at my feet. It landed with a heavy thud. I was going through my closet yesterday, and I found a bunch of things that just hang off me now. You know, since I lost all that weight for the baby. I was going to give them to Goodwill, but then I thought of you, Keisha. I know you and Derek are tightening your belts, so I figured you would appreciate some high fashion. Go on, open it. I crouched down and untied the knot. The smell of cheap perfume and stale closet air wafted up. I pulled out the top item. It was a beige dress with the logo of a famous French fashion house printed all over it. Mama Louise gasped. "Oh, look at that. That must have cost a fortune, Jessica. You are too generous to this girl." I ran the fabric through my fingers. It was rough, scratchy polyester. I looked at the stitching on the hem. It was crooked. The logo was slightly tilted. This was not high fashion. This was a $20 knockoff sold out of a trunk in a parking lot. I had the authentic version of this dress hanging in my climate-controlled storage unit downtown. The real one was made of Italian silk and cost $4,000. This was an insult wrapped in charity. Jessica watched me closely, waiting for me to be overcome with gratitude. "It is a little out of season," she said, taking another sip of tea. "But beggars cannot be choosers, right?" I fought the urge to throw the polyester rag into the fireplace. Instead, I folded it neatly. "Thank you, Jessica," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "This is very thoughtful of you." Derek walked over, chewing on a rib bone. He looked at the pile of cast-offs and then at me with a sneer. "See, Keisha, my family takes care of you even when you do not deserve it. Put that dress on for dinner. You look like a librarian in that gray thing you are wearing. At least try to look like you belong to a successful man." He laughed and slapped Kevin on the back. "She needs all the help she can get, right, brother?" I stood up, clutching the bag of fake clothes. "I will go change," I said. As I walked toward the bathroom, I heard Mama Louise mutter, "Dressing her up won't change the facts, Derek. A pretty dress does not make a barren woman useful." I froze. The insults about my clothes were one thing, but I knew what was coming next. The attack on my womanhood. Dinner was served on paper plates because Mama Louise claimed she was saving the good china for a special occasion. The implication was clear. My presence did not qualify as special. I sat at the far end of the table, picking at a piece of dry ham while Jessica held court at the center. She rubbed her swollen belly with a theatrical slowness, ensuring every eye in the room was fixed on her impending motherhood. "He is kicking," she announced, gasping dramatically. "Oh, Kevin, feel this. He is going to be a linebacker just like his daddy." Kevin beamed, placing a greasy hand on her stomach. Mama Louise watched them with a look of pure rapture. It was a tableau of the perfect family, the virile son, the fertile wife, the legacy secured. Then she turned her gaze to me, and the warmth instantly evaporated from her eyes, leaving only cold judgment. "It is a blessing," Mama Louise said loud enough to silence the room. "To see the family line continue. It is what a woman is put on this earth to do." "Isn't that right, Keisha?" I felt the trap snap shut, but I kept my face neutral. "Yes, Mama Louise, babies are a blessing." She slammed her fork down onto the table. The plastic utensil snapped under the force of her disappointment. "Then why is your garden so empty, Keisha? You have been married to my son for 3 years. Jessica has been here for 10 months and she is already giving me a grandson. What is wrong with you? Are you broken inside?" The table went silent. Derek did not defend me. He just kept chewing his potato salad, avoiding my eyes. He had complained to his mother about my infertility 1,000 times, using it as an excuse for his wandering eye. He told them I was dry. He told them I was struggling. The truth was much simpler and much darker. I was not infertile. My reproductive system worked perfectly. But every morning at 6 a.m., I took a small white pill from a blister pack hidden inside a hollowed-out book in my office. I looked at Derek wiping grease off his chin with his sleeve. I looked at his cruelty, his laziness, and his arrogance. There was no way I was going to let his DNA replicate. I was not failing to give him a child. I was protecting an innocent soul from having him as a father. Mama Louise leaned forward, her eyes narrowing into slits. You know what they say down south, Keisha. A fruit tree that bears no fruit is just firewood. You are taking up space. You are using up my son's resources and giving nothing back. A wife who cannot be a mother is just a roommate. She pointed a finger at me. I am tired of excuses. I am tired of waiting. I made an appointment for you with Dr. Robinson for next Tuesday. You are going to go. You are going to get checked again. And if they say you are barren, then you need to do the right thing and step aside so Derek can find a woman who works. Derek finally looked up, nodding in agreement. Mama is right, Keisha. We need to know if we are wasting our time. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. They wanted to inspect me like livestock. They wanted to breed me. I will go to the doctor, I said, my voice steady. Good, Mama Louise grunted. Because this family needs a future, not a dead end. She did not know that the dead end was sitting right next to her, and his name was Derek. And she definitely did not know that I was already planning to sever the family tree right at the root. The air in the dining room grew heavy, not just from the heat of the oven, but from the sudden shift in Derek's posture. He pushed his paper plate away, the grease from the ham, forming a translucent pool on the cardboard. He cleared his throat, a sound that demanded absolute silence. I have been doing some thinking, he announced, looking around the table to ensure he had everyone's attention. About the future, about legacy. This promotion is just the beginning. I have an opportunity to buy into a private equity startup. It is a sure thing. Triple returns in 6 months. But I need capital. Fast. He turned his eyes toward me. They were not the eyes of a partner asking for support. They were the eyes of a loan shark coming to collect. I need $50,000 by Monday morning, Keisha. I lowered my fork, letting the metal clink against the table. Derek, you know we do not have that kind of money. We are barely making the mortgage payments. He smiled, a slow, predatory curling of his lips. We do not have it. But you do. Or rather, your parents do. That retirement fund you manage for them. The one sitting in that credit union doing nothing. My blood ran cold. He was talking about the emergency fund my parents had scraped together over 40 years of factory work. In his mind, that money was just sitting there waiting for him to plunder. That is for their medical care, Derek, I said, keeping my voice trembling. My father needs surgery next year. I cannot touch that. Mama Louise slammed her hand on the table. Cannot or will not. You listen to me, girl. My son is trying to build an empire here. He is trying to lift this whole family up. And you are worried about hip surgery. A good wife sacrifices. A good wife puts her husband's vision before everything else. Jessica chimed in, swirling the ice in her glass. Honestly, Keisha, it is kind of selfish. Think about the baby. If Derek gets rich, we all benefit. Do not be the anchor dragging him down just because you are scared of success. Derek leaned in close, his breath smelling of sweet tea and manipulation. This is the problem with you, Keisha. You do not believe in me. You never have. If you loved me, if you truly wanted to make up for the fact that you cannot give me a son, you would give me this chance. Prove to me that you are committed to this marriage. Prove to me that you are not useless. The room was silent. They were all watching me, waiting for me to break. They wanted to see me cry. They wanted to see me beg. They wanted to strip my parents of their dignity to fund Derek's gambling addiction, or whatever scheme this actually was. I looked at Derek. I saw the greed etched into every line of his face. I calculated the legal implications. If he took that money, it wasn't just theft. It was elder abuse. It was wire fraud. It was another 10 years added to his sentence. I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders sag as if I were defeated. I looked him in the eye, masking my triumph with tears. You are right, Derek. I have been selfish. I want to support you. A grin broke across his face. "So, you will do it?" "Yes," I whispered. "I will go to the bank tomorrow morning. I will transfer the 50,000. Mama Louise clapped her hands. "Finally. God is good. You are finally learning your place, child." Derek reached out and squeezed my hand, painful and possessive. "Good girl. You won't regret this." He was right. I wouldn't regret it. But when the FBI traced that transfer, he certainly would. The applause from the dining room followed me down the narrow hallway like a mockery. Mama Louise and Jessica were practically celebrating my financial surrender, while Derek played the role of the benevolent patriarch. I slipped into the guest bathroom and locked the door behind me, leaning against the cool wood to catch my breath. The room was a capsule of the 1970s with peeling pink wallpaper and a faucet that dripped with a rhythmic, maddening sound. I turned on the tap, letting the water run cold and splashed my face. I needed to wash away the feeling of their greed. I looked at myself in the medicine cabinet mirror. My eyes were not red from crying, they were bright with adrenaline. I reached for the hand towel but stopped when I heard a heavy footfall right outside the door. The floorboards in this house were old and betrayed everyone who walked on them. Then came the sound of the linen closet door opening just inches away from where I stood. It was Derek. He must have stepped out to make a private call thinking I was still in the kitchen, or perhaps he simply did not care if I heard him. To him, I was just a walking checkbook, not a threat. I held my breath and pressed my ear against the thin, hollow door. His voice was low, but in the small hallway it carried clearly. "Hey, baby girl," he whispered. The tone was sickeningly sweet, the kind he used to use with me back when he was trying to get me to pay off his student loans. "I hope you are not sleeping." Silence followed as he listened to the person on the other end. Then he laughed, a low, throaty chuckle of triumph. "Yeah, it is done. I told you I would handle it." She folded like a cheap lawn chair. $50,000, baby. It will be in my account by tomorrow afternoon." My hand moved instinctively to my pocket. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder app. I did not need the spyware for this. I wanted a high-definition recording of his own voice condemning him. I pressed the red button and watched the sound waves spike on the screen as he continued. "Stop worrying about her. Keisha is clueless. She thinks this is for a business investment. She actually thinks she is buying shares in a private equity firm. God, she is so desperate for me to love her, she would believe anything I say. She is pathetic, really." I watched the timer on the screen count up. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. Every word was a nail in his coffin. "I promised you that C-Class Mercedes and I am a man of my word. As soon as the wire clears, we are going to the dealership. Consider it an early push present. I cannot wait to see you driving it. You deserve the best, not like the dead weight I am stuck with here." He sighed contentedly. "Okay, I have to go back in before they start wondering where the golden boy is. I love you too, baby. Bye." I heard the closet door click shut, and his footsteps retreat back toward the laughter in the dining room. I stopped the recording and saved the file, naming it simply The Mercedes Confession. I stared at the phone in my hand. He was going to take my parents' retirement money to buy a luxury car for the woman carrying his child. It was evil. It was sociopathic. And it was exactly the evidence I needed to destroy him. I turned off the faucet and dried my hands. I looked in the mirror one last time. The woman staring back at me smiled. It was a terrifying smile. I unlocked the door and stepped out into the hallway. I was not going back to the table to eat ham. I was going back to feed him to the wolves. The dining room was loud with the sound of self-congratulation when I returned. Derek was pouring more sweet tea, acting like the king of a castle he did not own, while Kevin sat mesmerized by Jessica's stories of grandeur. She was holding court, detailing the elaborate nursery she was planning. She spoke of imported Italian cribs, hand-painted wallpaper from Paris, and a nanny she claimed to have already interviewed who used to work for a celebrity. Mama Louise nodded along, entranced by the proximity to what she believed was white wealth. I sat back down in my folding chair, the metal cold against my legs. My phone vibrated 3 times in my pocket. It was the signal. I slipped the device under the table, shielding the screen with a napkin. The message from Marcus was concise, brutal, and thoroughly verified. Subject: Jessica Vance. Parents filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy 6 months ago. Family estate in Connecticut was foreclosed last week. Subject currently holds $84,000 in credit card debt across 5 maxed-out accounts. The BMW outside is 60 days past due. Repossession order active as of this morning. I read the words twice. The picture was complete. Jessica was not a wealthy heiress marrying down for love. She was a financial refugee looking for a lifeboat, and she had found one in Kevin. She was not the prize. She was a parasite, and she had the audacity to call me a burden. I placed the phone face down on the table. Jessica was just finishing her monologue about how she simply could not tolerate synthetic fabrics for the baby's skin. "It has to be organic Egyptian cotton," she said with a delicate shudder. "Anything less is just negligent. I do not know how people shop at discount stores. It is practically child abuse." I picked up my glass of water and took a slow, deliberate sip. Over the rim of the glass, I locked eyes with her. For the first time all evening, I did not look away. I did not shrink. I let the mask of the submissive wife slip just enough for her to see the predator underneath. I smiled. It was a sharp, terrifying expression that did not reach my eyes. Jessica faltered mid-sentence. Her hand fluttered nervously to her throat, fingering the necklace that I now knew was likely cubic zirconia, not diamond. "Is something funny, Keisha?" she asked, her voice losing its airy confidence and taking on a defensive edge. "Not funny, Jessica," I said, my voice smooth and low. "Just interesting. I admire your commitment to luxury. It takes a lot of bravery to spend that kind of money, especially in this economy." Derek frowned, sensing the tension, but missing the subtext entirely. "What are you talking about, Keisha? Jessica's family has money. They do not have to worry about the economy like regular people." I did not look at Derek. I kept my gaze pinned on Jessica, watching the color drain from her face. "Of course," I said. "But even old money can dry up, right, Jessica? I was just reading an article about how quickly fortunes change. One day you are shopping in Paris. The next day you are filing for Chapter 11 and hiding your car from the repo man because you are 2 months behind on payments. It must be exhausting trying to keep up appearances when the credit cards are maxed out." The silence that followed was absolute. Kevin stopped chewing. Mama Louise looked confused. But Jessica looked like she had seen a ghost. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She knew that I knew. The power dynamic in the room shifted violently. She was no longer the queen. She was the hostage. The transition from dinner to dessert was seamless for everyone except me. The meal ended not with a thank you, but with the scraping of chairs against the linoleum floor. Derek belched loudly, a sound of satisfied gluttony, and patted his stomach. "That was good, Mama," he said, standing up. "Let us go watch the fourth quarter." Kevin and Jessica followed him immediately, leaving their dirty napkins and half-eaten corn cobs scattered across the table like the aftermath of a riot. Mama Louise stood up, smoothing her apron. "Clear this up, Keisha," she ordered, pointing at the devastation. "And be careful with the china. That tea set on the sideboard belonged to my great-grandmother. It is worth more than you make in a month. Do not chip it." She waddled into the living room, leaving me alone in the kitchen. I was not a guest. I was the staff. I gathered the plates, my movements mechanical. From the other room I could hear the roar of the television and the laughter of the people who were actively plotting to steal my parents' retirement money. I heard Jessica complaining about the heat and Derek promising her that next year they would have central air. They were spending my money before they even had it. I walked over to the sink and turned on the water. It sputtered out brown for a second before running clear. I looked at the sponge. For 3 years I had scrubbed their messes. I had scrubbed their floors, their toilets, and their sins. Today was the last time. I dried my hands on a towel and turned toward the sideboard. The antique tea set sat there on a yellowed lace doily. It was porcelain hand painted with delicate blue flowers. It was the only thing in this house Mama Louise actually respected. She polished it weekly. She valued this ceramic pot more than she valued my dignity. I picked up the teapot. It was light fragile. I ran my thumb over the spout, feeling the cool glaze. Through the doorway, I saw the back of Derek's head. He was cheering for a touchdown, his arms raised in triumph. I adjusted my grip. I did not slip. I did not stumble. I simply opened my hand. Gravity took over. The teapot hit the linoleum floor with a sound like a gunshot. It exploded into 1,000 jagged shards. The lid spun away, coming to a rest against the refrigerator. The noise cut through the football commentary, instantly silencing the house. "What was that?" Mama Louise screamed. She appeared in the doorway faster than I had ever seen her move. When she saw the pile of blue and white porcelain, her eyes bulged. Her hand flew to her chest. "My teapot. My grandmother's teapot. You clumsy, heavy-handed fool. Look what you did." Derek and the others crowded behind her. Derek looked furious. "Are you serious, Keisha? Can you not do anything right? That is a family heirloom." I stood amidst the wreckage. I did not look down. I did not apologize. I kicked a shard of porcelain with the toe of my shoe, sending it skittering across the floor until it hit Mama Louise's slipper. "Oops," I said, my voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "I guess I lost my grip." But you know what they say, Mama Louise, old things are brittle. They break so easily when you stop pretending to care about them. The drive home was a masterclass in verbal abuse. Derek gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, but his rage directed entirely at the passenger seat. The silence of the night was broken only by the hum of the engine and the venom in his voice. "You are a disaster, Keisha, a walking disaster. Do you have any idea how much that tea set was worth? It has been in the family for 4 generations. Mama loved that pot more than she loves most people, and you smashed it like it was a cheap toy." I stared out the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of neon. I did not defend myself. I did not tell him that the tea set was actually a reproduction from the 1990s worth maybe $50 on eBay. I let him believe he had lost a treasure because it fueled his sense of victimhood. "I am sorry, Derek," I said softly. "It slipped." "It slipped." He mocked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Everything slips with you. You slip at my job events. You slip with my family. You slip when it comes to being a wife. I take you out to one nice dinner, and you end up destroying property. I hope you are happy because Mama is going to be talking about this for the next decade." He kept ranting, listing my failures one by one. While he was distracted by his own voice, I slid my hand into my pocket. My thumb hovered over the screen of my phone. I did not need to look down. I knew exactly where the contact for Marcus was. I typed a single message. "Activate Phase 2. Purchase the debt." I pressed send. Phase 2 was the kill switch. It was the order for Phoenix Capital to buy the promissory notes for Derek's maxed-out credit cards and the high-interest loan he had secretly taken out to fund his gambling. As of this moment, I was no longer just his wife. I was his creditor. I owned his financial soul. The phone vibrated with a confirmation. Done. Suddenly, a loud chime filled the car. It was Derek's phone sitting in the cup holder. The screen lit up with a notification from the bank. Derek glanced down. His rant cut off mid-sentence. He grabbed the phone, swerving slightly into the next lane. He read the screen, and the scowl on his face vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated greed. "Yes," he shouted, hitting the steering wheel with his palm. "Yes, finally." He looked at me, his eyes wild with excitement. "It is happening, Keisha. The financing came through. The bank just approved the preliminary transfer. They know a winner when they see one." He was talking about the $50,000 he thought I was wiring him. He thought the notification was a deposit alert. He did not realize it was actually a notification that his debt had been sold to a new holding company, a company controlled by me. He laughed a loud, arrogant sound that filled the small car. I told you I would make it happen. I am unstoppable, Keisha. This is the start of the big leagues. No more counting pennies. No more listening to you worry about bills. I am going to be rich. He turned up the radio, singing along to a rap song about money and power. He was celebrating his own funeral. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. A small smile played on my lips, hidden by the shadows. You are right, Derek, I whispered so low he could not hear me over the music. You are going to get exactly what you deserve. The car sped down the highway carrying a fool who thought he was a king and the queen who had just checkmated him. Phase 2 had begun, and there was no turning back. It was 2 in the morning when the motion sensor in the study triggered a silent alert on my phone. I was lying in bed with my eyes closed, breathing in the slow, rhythmic pattern of deep sleep, while Derek crept out of the room. He moved with the exaggerated stealth of a cartoon villain, tiptoeing across the carpet to avoid squeaky floorboards. I waited 30 seconds before pulling my phone from under my pillow to watch the live feed from the hidden camera in the bookshelf. Derek was standing in front of the wall safe. He held a piece of paper in his hand which I recognized immediately as the combination code I had written down in a fake diary specifically for him to find. He typed in the numbers. The safe beeped softly and clicked open. He reached inside and pulled out the deed to the house. I watched him on the small screen as he carried the document to the desk and turned on the small reading lamp. His hands were shaking. At first I thought it might be guilt. I thought perhaps some small part of him hesitated to mortgage the roof over his wife's head without her consent. But as he zoomed the camera in, I saw his face. There was no guilt. There was only the feverish sweat of a gambling addict looking at his next fix. He was terrified of getting caught, but he was more terrified of being poor. He pulled a sheet of legal paper from the printer and uncapped a pen. For the next 20 minutes, I watched my husband practice forging my signature. He wrote Keisha Williams over and over again. He stopped to wipe his sweaty palms on his pajama pants. He held his version up against an old tax return of mine, comparing the loops of the K and the slant of the W. He was meticulous. He was focused. It was the most effort I had seen him put into anything in our entire marriage. Finally, he felt ready. He placed the loan application on the desk. This was the document that would use our home as collateral for a high-risk, high-interest loan, a loan he intended to use to cover his tracks and buy his way into a fake future. He took a deep breath and pressed the pen to the paper. He signed my name. It was a felony, forgery, fraud, grand larceny. He committed 3 crimes in 10 seconds, and he did it with a smile. He scanned the document into his laptop. I switched camera feeds to the screen recording software I had installed. I watched him log into the portal for First National Bank. He uploaded the forged deed and the fraudulent application. He stared at the screen, his finger hovering over the submit button. Do it, he whispered to himself. Do it, and you are free. He clicked the mouse. Upload complete. Application received. He leaned back in the chair, exhaling a long breath of relief. He thought he had just secured a lifeline. He thought he had outsmarted me. He did not know that the loan officer who would receive that file at 9 a.m. was not a random employee. He was a man named Mr. Henderson, and Mr. Henderson was on my payroll. Derek had not just applied for a loan. He had just handed me the final piece of evidence I needed to bury him. At 9 o'clock sharp, Derek walked into the glass-walled office of the senior loan officer at First National Bank. He was wearing his best suit and carrying a leather briefcase that contained a lie. I was not there physically, but I was present in every pixel of the surveillance feed streaming to my tablet. Sitting across from Derek was Mr. Henderson. To the world, Henderson was a respectable banker with 30 years of experience. To me, he was an old friend from business school, whose gambling debts I had quietly settled 2 years ago. He owed me a life, and today he was paying his installment. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses and picked up the deed Derek had placed on the mahogany desk. He studied the forged signature. He ran his thumb over the notary seal which Derek had photoshopped late last night. The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. Derek was sweating. I could see the damp patches forming under his arms. He was tapping his foot a nervous staccato rhythm against the carpet. "Your wife signed this last night?" Mr. Wilson asked, without looking up. Derek cleared his throat. "Yes. She is fully on board. We are partners in this venture. She trusts my business acumen implicitly." Henderson looked up. For a second I thought he might break character and laugh at the absurdity of the statement, but he remained stone-faced. He nodded slowly. "Excellent. Then everything seems to be in order." He opened a thick folder and slid a stack of documents across the desk. "This is the loan agreement, Mr. Wilson. It is a standard high-leverage liquidity injection. Because you need the funds immediately without the usual 30-day waiting period, we have structured this as a variable-rate bridge loan." Derek reached for the pen, his eyes fixed on the check that was already printed and waiting on the corner of the desk. "Variable rate. Sure. Whatever. I will have it paid off in 3 months anyway." Henderson smiled a thin, shark-like expression. "Of course, but I must draw your attention to Clause 14, Section C on page 42. It states that if any payment is missed by even a single hour, or if the collateral is found to be misrepresented, the interest rate automatically adjusts to a default penalty of 200% retroactive to the date of signing." Derek did not turn to page 42. He did not read Clause 14, Section C. He did not even blink. He was staring at the check for $50,000. He saw a new car. He saw freedom. He saw a life where he was the big man. "I trust you, Henderson," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Just show me where to sign." Henderson pointed to the X at the bottom of the page. "Right here, Mr. Wilson. Press hard. It is a carbon copy." Derek pressed the pen to the paper. The scratching sound of the nib was loud in the quiet office. He signed his name with a flourish. With that ink, he did not just sign a loan. He signed his death warrant. He had just legally agreed to terms that would strip him of everything he owned the moment I revealed the deed was a forgery. "Congratulations, Mr. Wilson," Henderson said, handing him the check. "You are now fully funded." Derek stood up, clutching the check like a holy relic. "Thank you. You won't regret this." He walked out of the bank, strutting like a peacock. I closed the laptop. He was right. Henderson wouldn't regret it. But Derek certainly would. He had just sold his soul to the devil, and he didn't even read the receipt. The notifications started rolling in at 10:30 in the morning. I sat in my home office pretending to balance our household checkbook, but in reality I was watching the digital dissection of a fool. First came the alert from Tiffany & Company, $12,000. Item description: diamond solitaire ring. He was buying an engagement ring for a woman while still legally married to the one paying his bills. 10 minutes later, another alert popped up. Rolex authorized dealer, $8,000. He was buying himself a gold watch. He was burning through the loan money with the reckless abandon of a man who believed the well would never run dry. He was not investing in a private equity firm. He was investing in his own vanity. By noon, he had spent $25,000. That was half the loan principal. He was technically committing wire fraud by using business capital for personal luxury goods, but Derek never let laws get in the way of his ego. I saved every receipt image to a folder marked Evidence. He came home at 7 o'clock. He did not park in the driveway. He parked on the street, likely to avoid scratching the new rims he had undoubtedly ordered. He walked through the front door carrying a small velvet box hidden deep in his jacket pocket and a greasy cardboard bucket in his hand. The smell of fried chicken filled the pristine foyer, overpowering the scent of his expensive new cologne. He looked flushed. He looked like a man who had just conquered the world. He tossed the bucket onto the mahogany dining table. It landed with a hollow thud that echoed in the silence of the house. "Dinner is served," he announced, taking off his jacket and carefully draping it over a chair so as not to crush the jewelry box hiding inside. I treated myself to a steak dinner with the new investors. Big steak, filet mignon. But I did not forget about you, Keisha. I brought you something. I walked over to the table and looked inside the bucket. It was half empty. There were 2 cold drumsticks, a container of coleslaw that had spilled on the side, and a biscuit that looked like it had been dropped on the floor. It was scraps. He had brought his wife the garbage from his celebration. "You are welcome," he said, walking to the liquor cabinet and pouring himself a drink. "Most men would not even bother bringing leftovers home. But I take care of you. I always have. You should be grateful you have a husband who feeds you." I looked at the cold chicken. Then I looked at the back of his head as he swirled his scotch. I did not feel anger anymore. Anger is hot and messy. What I felt was the icy calm of a judge delivering a death sentence. He thought he was feeding a stray dog. He did not realize he was feeding the beast that would devour him. "Thank you, Derek," I said, picking up the bucket, my voice devoid of any sarcasm. "It was very thoughtful of you." I took the food into the kitchen. I did not eat it. I placed it on a plate and set it down on the counter. I stared at the greasy skin of the chicken. "Eat up," I whispered to the empty room. "Enjoy the feeling of being full, Derek. Because this is the last supper. Tomorrow, you starve." 2 days after he blew through half the loan, my body finally crashed. The adrenaline that had been sustaining me evaporated, leaving behind a fever that spiked to 103 degrees. I lay curled on the living room sofa, shivering violently under 3 heavy blankets. My throat felt like it was lined with razor blades, and every breath was a labor. I was not just sick, I was incapacitated. Derek walked into the room at 8 o'clock. He was dressed in a new tailored suit that he had bought with the stolen funds. The gold Rolex glinted on his wrist as he adjusted his cufflinks. He smelled of expensive cologne and arrogance. He looked at me not with concern, but with visible irritation. "Derek," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. "Please, I need medicine. I think I have an infection. I cannot drive. Please go to the pharmacy." He sighed, a long, heavy sound of inconvenience. He checked his watch. "Are you serious, Keisha? Right now. Kevin and Jessica are waiting for me at the Onyx. We have a VIP table. I am not going to be late because you decided to catch a cold." "It is not a cold," I whispered, tears of heat pricking my eyes. "I am burning up. Please help me." He walked over and stood above me. He did not touch my forehead. He did not offer me water. He looked down at me like I was a stain on his expensive carpet. "You are always sick, always tired, always complaining. You are such a drag, Keisha. Do you know how embarrassing it is to have a wife who is basically an invalid? Stop being so dramatic and sleep it off. There is tap water in the kitchen if you are thirsty." He turned on his heel. "Do not call me," he threw over his shoulder. "I do not want you ruining my vibe tonight." The front door slammed. Then I heard the deadbolt slide home. He had locked me in. He left his delirious wife without medicine or water to go pop bottles with his brother's mistress. I closed my eyes, accepting the darkness. Time blurred. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my dreams filled with fire. I do not know how much time passed before I heard a noise. It was not the front door. It was the sound of glass being cut. A moment later, the balcony door slid open. A shadow moved silently across the room. It was not a burglar. It was a savior in a tactical suit. Marcus had scaled the second-floor balcony because he knew Derek had locked the main entrance. Madam Marcus's voice was low and urgent. He knelt beside me. He did not ask questions. He pressed a cool, chemically activated pack to my forehead and lifted my head to help me drink electrolyte water from a pouch. He administered a high-dose fever reducer from a field medical kit with the precision of a combat medic. "He left you without supplies," Marcus stated, his voice trembling with a suppressed rage I had never heard before. "He locked the doors from the outside. If your fever had spiked higher, you could have seized." I looked at my bodyguard. The man paid to protect me, showing more humanity in 5 minutes than my husband had in 3 years. The cold water hit my stomach and clarity returned. The fever was burning the weakness out of me, leaving only hatred. I sat up, clutching Marcus's arm, my grip surprisingly strong. "I am done waiting, Marcus," I rasped. "Call the board of directors. Tell them to execute the hostile takeover tonight. I want him unemployed before his hangover starts." The fever broke at 4 in the morning, leaving me weak but clear-headed. By 6, I was in the back of the Maybach watching the city wake up. Derek was still asleep in the bed I had left, probably dreaming of his non-existent promotion. He did not know that the woman he had locked in the house without water was currently on her way to buy his future. I walked into the Phoenix Capital conference room at 7 sharp. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and high-stakes negotiation. My team had been up all night finalizing the strategy. David, the lead analyst, stood up as I entered. His eyes were red-rimmed, but he was smiling. "Good morning, madam," he said, sliding a heavy binder across the polished mahogany table. "We are ready. The liquidity gathered from the offshore accounts is verified. We have secured the voting proxy from the minority shareholders. If you sign this document, Phoenix Capital becomes the majority owner of Vantage Group effective immediately." I ran my hand over the leather cover of the binder. Vantage Group. The company Derek worshipped. The company he claimed was his family. He had spent years licking the boots of the executives desperate to be invited to their inner circle. Now I was about to become their god. I opened the binder. The numbers were astronomical, but to me, they were just coordinates on a battlefield. I picked up my pen. It was a Mont Blanc, heavier than the one Derek had used to forge my signature, but infinitely more powerful, because the ink inside it was legal. "Executed," I said. I signed my name, Keisha Williams. With that signature, 51% of the company changed hands. The board of directors was dissolved. The CEO was now answering to me. David nodded and tapped a command on his tablet. "The transfer is initiated. The press release goes out at 9. The market is going to react violently." "Let it burn," I said, standing up and walking to the window. "I want to see the personnel files." David projected a spreadsheet onto the smart glass wall. It was a list of every employee at Vantage Group ranked by salary and performance. "As part of the restructuring, we have prepared a reduction in force plan," David explained. "We need to trim the fat to maximize the stock value. The algorithm has flagged the bottom 20% of performers for immediate termination." I looked at the list. There were hundreds of names, good people who worked hard. And then there was the sales division. "Filter by sales management," I ordered. The list shrank. And there, right at the top, was the name I was looking for: Derek Wilson. His performance metrics were abysmal. His expense account was flagged for fraud. He was not just a bad husband, he was a bad investment. "Fire him," I said, my voice cold and absolute. David hesitated. "Madame, he is the first name on the list. Usually we notify the senior managers first." I turned to face him. I said, "Fire him." But not yet. Let him walk into that gala tonight thinking he is the king. Let him put on his rented tuxedo. I want him to feel the height of the fall. Draft the termination letter effective midnight. And David, make sure I am the one who signs it. I looked back at the city skyline. I owned the building he worked in. I owned the debt he owed. And now, I owned the job he bragged about. The net was closing in. Derek came home at 6 o'clock, vibrating with an energy that was almost manic. He did not walk through the door so much as he burst through it, kicking his shoes off into the hallway and tossing his keys onto the credenza with a clatter that sounded like a gunshot. He was grinning, a wide, terrified grin of a man who had convinced himself that the cliff edge was actually a finish line. "Honey," he shouted, his voice cracking with excitement, "pack your bags." We made it. I walked out of the kitchen, wiping my hands on a dish towel. I had just finished reviewing the termination protocols with my legal team via encrypted text, but to him, I was just finishing the dishes. "What happened, Derek?" I asked, playing my part. He grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me slightly. "I just had a private meeting with the vice president." He pulled me aside right before he left the office. He told me to be ready for tomorrow night. He said the board has been watching me. He said, I am the future of Vantage Group. I fought the urge to laugh. The vice president was currently shredding documents in a panic because my acquisition team had locked him out of the server, but he had clearly decided to use Derek as a human shield one last time. He had fed Derek a fantasy to keep him quiet until the axe fell. That is amazing, Derek, I said. It is not just amazing, it is destiny. He let go of me and grabbed a garment bag he had draped over the sofa. This is for tomorrow. I need you to iron it. And be careful, Keisha. This is a tuxedo. It is a rental, but I paid extra for the premium fit. I want crisp lines. I want to look sharp when I walk across that stage to accept my new title. He unzipped the bag, revealing a suit that was visibly cheap. The fabric had that distinct synthetic sheen that screamed polyester blend. The lapels were too wide, and the buttons looked like plastic trying to be pearl. It was a costume of wealth worn by a man drowning in debt. I took the hanger. The suit felt light and flimsy in my hands. I will make it perfect, I said. I set up the ironing board in the living room, while Derek paced back and forth practicing his acceptance speech to the empty air. I just want to thank my team, he muttered, gesturing to the television. And of course my mother, who always believed in me. He stopped and looked at me as I pressed the steam button. The hissing sound filled the room. You know, Keisha, tomorrow is the day I finally change my life. No more scraping by. No more listening to you worry about the electric bill. I am going to be a vice president. I am going to be somebody. I ran the hot iron over the cheap fabric, smoothing out the wrinkles of his delusion. The steam rose up hot and damp against my face. You are right, Derek, I said, keeping my eyes on his pants leg. Tomorrow everything changes. You have no idea how right you are. He poured himself a drink and raised it in a toast to his own reflection in the mirror. To the top, baby, to the top. I pressed down hard on the iron, sealing the crease. To the bottom, I thought. To the absolute rock bottom. I finished ironing his shroud and hung it up on the doorframe. He looked at it with reverence. He did not see a cheap rental suit. He saw a king's robe. He did not know that by this time tomorrow he would be stripped of it in front of everyone he tried to impress. Get some sleep, Keisha, he ordered, heading to the bedroom. You need to look presentable tomorrow. Do not embarrass me. I unplugged the iron. I won't embarrass you, Derek, I whispered to the empty room. I am going to destroy you. And I am going to look fantastic doing it. The morning of the gala arrived with a sky the color of bruised slate. Derek was too nervous to eat. He paced the kitchen floor in his undershirt, checking his phone every 30 seconds as if expecting a call from the president himself. I sat at the kitchen island drinking black coffee and watching him spiral. He looked manic. His eyes were wide and he kept wiping his palms on his pants. He stopped pacing abruptly and reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a heavy cream-colored envelope embossed with gold lettering. He did not hand it to me. He flicked it across the granite countertop like he was dealing a playing card. It spun and landed face up next to my mug. There it is, he said, breathing heavily. Your ticket to the big leagues. Do not lose it. That piece of paper costs $500 a plate. I picked up the invitation. The paper was thick, textured linen. The gold foil stamped into the cardstock read, Vantage Group Annual Charity Gala. I ran my finger over the raised letters. Derek watched me with a look of critical assessment, as if he were inspecting a used car he had just bought and was now regretting. Listen to me very carefully, Keisha, he said, leaning over the counter. This is not a family barbecue. This is high society. These are the movers and shakers of Chicago. I had to pull serious strings to get a +1 because usually wives are not invited to the executive tables. So do not make me regret this. He began listing his rules, counting them off on his fingers. Number 1, do not drink. You get sloppy after 2 glasses of wine and I need you sharp. Number 2, do not try to talk business. If someone asks what you do, just say you support my career. Keep it vague. Keep it short. Nobody cares about your little hobbies. And number 3, fix your face. None of that bright red lipstick you like. It looks cheap. Wear something neutral. Be invisible. You are there to be decoration, Keisha. Nothing more. Just stand there, smile and nod. Can you handle that? I looked at the invitation. I knew the paper stock. I knew the font. I had approved the design 3 weeks ago from my office. I knew exactly who was on the guest list, and I knew that the executive table he mentioned was actually legally mine. I can handle it, Derek, I said, sipping my coffee. I will be the perfect accessory. He nodded, satisfied that he had trained me sufficiently. Good. I am going to get my hair cut. Be ready at 5, and try to look like you belong to a vice president. He grabbed his keys and left. As soon as the garage door rumbled shut, the silence returned to the house. I finished my coffee and walked down the hallway to the guest bedroom. I opened the closet door. It was filled with old coats and boxes of holiday decorations. I pushed aside a stack of winter blankets and pressed my hand against the back panel of the wardrobe. A hidden latch clicked. The false wall swung open, revealing a small climate-controlled space that smelled of cedar and lavender. Hanging in the center was a garment bag stamped with the logo of a Parisian couture house. I unzipped it slowly. Inside was not a neutral dress. It was a weapon made of midnight blue silk and crushed velvet. It was a custom gown that hugged every curve, designed to catch the light and command every eye in the room. I ran my hand down the fabric. Derek wanted me to be invisible. Tonight I was going to be the only thing anyone could see. I closed the bag and smiled. The accessory was about to become the main event. The transformation took exactly 45 minutes. I showered in the guest bathroom, scrubbing away the smell of the house, the smell of the sickness, and the smell of my marriage. I applied my makeup with the precision of a restoration artist. I did not use the beige neutrals Derek had demanded. I used a deep, smoky palette that made my eyes look like flint. I pulled the midnight blue couture gown from the bag. It slid over my body like a second skin, the crushed velvet catching the light in the dim room. I fastened the diamond choker around my neck, a piece worth more than Derek's entire life earnings. But the world was not allowed to see it yet. I walked to the back of the closet and pulled out my old shapeless trench coat. It was a faded tan color, missing a button with a stain on the hem from a winter 3 years ago. I buttoned it all the way up to my chin, completely concealing the gown. I pulled my hair into a severe bun and put on a pair of scuffed flats, hiding my stilettos in my purse. When I walked out to the driveway, Derek was waiting. He had rented a limousine, but it was not the sleek black town car of a serious executive. It was a white stretch Hummer, the kind used for high school proms and bachelorette parties. It was loud, excessive, and tacky. He looked at me and grimaced. Jesus, Keisha. That coat is an abomination. You look like you are soliciting donations. Keep it buttoned until we get to the coat check. I do not want anyone seeing what is underneath until you are safely in the corner. He opened the back door, but as I moved to get in, he blocked my path with his arm. Hold on. Change of plans. You are sitting up front with the driver. I looked at him, confused. Excuse me, I have a colleague joining us for the ride over. We need to discuss sensitive numbers before the gala. Confidential company business. You would just be in the way. He pointed to the front passenger door. Sit there. Do not talk to the driver. Do not turn around. I walked to the front door and climbed in. The driver was a heavy-set man chewing on a toothpick. He looked at me with pity, but I just stared straight ahead. Through the partition, I heard the back door open again. I heard the click of high heels and a high-pitched giggle. Hi, Daddy, a female voice cooed. You look so rich. It was her, the mistress, the woman he was buying a Mercedes for. He was bringing her in the limo, forcing his wife to sit like a chauffeur while he fondled his girlfriend in the back seat. The ride was 20 minutes of torture. I could hear the clinking of champagne glasses. I could hear wet, sloppy whispers. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, feeling the heavy cardstock of the invitation in my pocket. I was not angry. I was counting down. 2 blocks from the hotel, the partition slid down. Pull over here, Derek commanded. The limo stopped at a dark corner. I watched through the side mirror as a woman in a red dress hopped out. She blew a kiss at the tinted window and disappeared into the night. Derek knocked on the glass behind my head. "All right, Keisha. You can come back here now. We are arriving." I got out and moved to the back seat. The air inside was thick with her perfume and the smell of cheap champagne. Derek was checking his teeth in the reflection of the minibar. "Wipe that sour look off your face," he said, adjusting his rental tie. "It is showtime. Remember, you are lucky to be here." The limo turned the corner and the lights of the Grand Hotel blazed into view. A red carpet was rolled out, flanked by photographers and security. The car slowed to a crawl. "Here we go." Derek whispered, a hunger in his eyes that was almost frightening. "My kingdom awaits." He had no idea that he was walking into his own execution. The flashbulbs popped like lightning in a summer storm, blinding and relentless. The air outside the Grand Hotel smelled of ozone and desperation. Derek stepped onto the plush crimson runner and threw his arms wide. He posed. He preened. He thought the paparazzi were there for the junior vice president of a failing branch. He did not realize they were there for the rumors of a hostile takeover that had been swirling around Vantage Group all afternoon. He soaked up the attention, mistaking curiosity for admiration. I stepped out of the Hummer behind him, clutching my purse against the tattered fabric of my beige trench coat. I moved to stand beside him, my husband, the man I had supported for 3 years. He felt my presence and his smile vanished instantly. He turned his back to the cameras, shielding his face from the lens so he could hiss at me without losing his public persona. "Move," he whispered through gritted teeth. "You are ruining the composition. Look at you. You look like a bag lady. Go stand by the security guard. Do not come back until I wave for you." He physically shoved me with his elbow. Not hard enough to knock me over, but hard enough to make me stumble in my heels. I retreated to the shadows near the velvet rope, standing next to a bored security guard who looked at my coat with suspicion. A moment later, a neon pink blur arrived. It was Jessica. She was wearing a gown that was all sequins and feathers, a dress that screamed for attention but lacked any taste. She waddled down the carpet, clinging to Kevin's arm, beaming at the cameras that were already turning away from her. She spotted me standing in the corner, wrapped in my old coat, and burst into laughter. "Oh my God, Keisha!" she shrieked loud enough for the front row of reporters to hear. "Did you get lost on the way to the coat check? You look like a homeless person crashing a royal wedding." "It is actually tragic. Derek is a saint for bringing you out in public." She smoothed her rented sequins, looking me up and down with disdain. "At least try to hide behind the potted plant," she sneered. "You are bringing down the property value." Just then, a photographer near the rope lowered his camera. He was an older man, a veteran of the fashion circuit, with sharp, intelligent eyes. His lens was not pointed at Jessica's sequins or Derek's plastic smile. It was pointed at my feet. The trench coat covered my gown, but it did not cover my ankles. I was wearing the Midnight Star stilettos custom-made by Christian Louboutin. There were only 5 pairs in the world, and they were encrusted with black diamonds. The photographer frowned, squinting at the shoes. He nudged his colleague. "Hey, look at those heels! Is that the limited edition Star Series? I haven't seen those since Paris Fashion Week." Derek saw the camera pointing my way. He stepped in front of me, blocking the view instantly. "Ignore her!" he shouted over the noise, laughing dismissively. "My wife likes to buy fakes in Chinatown. She thinks they look real, but we all know better, right? Stick to the real talent, boys." He grabbed Jessica's arm and pulled her into the center of the carpet, leaving me in the dark. The photographer shook his head, assuming Derek was right. He went back to shooting the clowns. I adjusted my coat, covering the diamonds. They were laughing now. But the show was just beginning, and I was about to steal the spotlight. The ballroom of the Grand Hotel was a cavern of gold leaf and crystal. Waiters in white tuxedos moved through the crowd like ghosts carrying trays of champagne and caviar. I stood near a marble pillar, clutching my trench coat tight around my throat. Derek had abandoned me the moment we cleared security. He was currently standing in a circle of men near the orchestra pit, laughing too loudly at a joke he probably did not understand. He looked desperate. He was shaking hands with a frantic energy, trying to physically force his way into the inner circle of Chicago's elite. I watched him from the shadows. I was not bored. I was observing. I was memorizing faces. Half the people in this room were currently on my payroll or owed money to banks I controlled. They were preening in their finery, unaware that the woman standing in the corner looking like a beggar held the keys to their kingdoms. A woman approached me. She was draped in emerald silk and wearing enough jewelry to sink a small boat. Her face was pulled tight by surgery, and her eyes were glazed with boredom and alcohol. She stopped right in front of me and held out a half-empty champagne flute. The rim was smeared with red lipstick, and a cigarette butt floated in the dregs. Here, she said, not even looking at my face. "Take this away. And bring me a fresh one. Dry, not sweet." She mistook my trench coat for a uniform. She thought I was part of the help. I stared at the glass. The lipstick stain looked like a wound. I did not move. "Excuse me," the woman snapped, shaking the glass at me. "Are you deaf?" I said, "Take this." Derek appeared at her elbow instantly. He had been watching. A normal husband would have corrected her. A normal husband would have said, "This is my wife." But Derek was not a normal husband. He was a coward who valued the approval of strangers over the dignity of his partner. He recognized the woman as Mrs. Sterling, the wife of a major investor. He panicked. "Mrs. Sterling, I am so sorry," he gushed, flashing his teeth. "She is new. She is a little slow." He turned to me. His eyes were hard and cold. "Do not be rude, Keisha. Do what the lady asks. Take the glass." I looked at him. He was ordering me to serve a stranger. He was demoting me from wife to waitress in front of the very people he wanted to impress. He thought he was saving face. He thought he was showing Mrs. Sterling that he was a man who commanded obedience. "Take it," he hissed. "Now." I reached out and took the glass. The crystal was cold, but my blood was boiling. Mrs. Sterling smirked, turning back to Derek. "Good help is so hard to find these days," she drawled. I held the glass for a second, feeling the weight of their contempt. I did not walk toward the kitchen. I did not look for a waiter's tray. I turned slowly and walked 3 steps to a large ornamental brass trash bin standing near the entrance. I held the glass high so Derek could see it. Then I dropped it. It did not slide in gently. I threw it. The crystal shattered against the metal bottom with a loud, violent crash that cut through the murmur of the crowd. Heads turned. The music seemed to stutter. I turned back to Derek and dusted my hands off. There, I said, my voice carrying across the silence. "It is clean. Would you like me to take out the trash next? Or are you not ready to leave yet?" The ballroom was a purgatory of polite conversation and aggressive networking. I sat on a velvet ottoman in the furthest corner of the room, half hidden by a massive arrangement of white lilies. My trench coat was still buttoned to my chin, making me look like a specter haunting the celebration. I was invisible to everyone except the waiters, who looked at me with suspicion, wondering if I had wandered in from the street. I watched Derek. He was 20 feet away, performing the dance of the desperate. He was hovering over Mr. Henderson, the vice president of sales, laughing uproariously at a joke that clearly wasn't funny. Derek's posture was submissive, his spine curved in a perpetual bow. He was touching the man's arm, pouring him more wine, acting less like a junior executive and more like a court jester. Every few minutes, Derek would glance over his shoulder to check on me. His eyes were hard, carrying a silent warning. "Stay there. Don't move. Don't speak. Don't ruin this." He had no idea that the man he was trying to impress was currently reading a termination email on his BlackBerry under the table. I could see the vice president's face turn an ashen gray, but Derek was too busy talking about his own potential to notice his boss's career collapsing in real time. The orchestra swelled, playing a waltz that drowned out the murmur of the crowd. Across the room, the double doors opened. A man walked in who changed the atmosphere of the space simply by existing. It was Marcus. He was not wearing his driver's uniform. He was dressed in a bespoke tuxedo that cost more than Derek's car. He moved with the predatory grace of a panther in a room full of house cats. He did not look at the waitstaff. He did not look at the desperate executives. He scanned the room until his eyes locked onto mine. He stood by the champagne tower, accepted a glass from a server, and took a slow, deliberate sip. Then he raised his left hand and adjusted his cufflink. It was a small, precise movement. It was the signal. It was time. The board meeting was concluded. The acquisition was finalized. The press release had just hit the wire services. The trap was sprung. I felt a shiver run down my spine, not from cold, but from pure electric anticipation. I was done sitting in the corner. I was done being the embarrassment. I was done being the wife in the beige trench coat. I stood up. The movement caught Derek's eye. He frowned, breaking his conversation to glare at me. He made a subtle cutting motion with his hand, silently ordering me to sit back down. He thought I was getting restless. He thought I was disobeying his command to remain invisible. I ignored him. I turned my back on his glare and began to walk toward the marble corridor that led to the restrooms. I walked with a new rhythm. My steps were heavy with purpose. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the ladies' lounge. The room was empty, a quiet sanctuary of mirrors and gold faucets. I looked at my reflection in the glass. The tired, beaten woman stared back. I reached for the top button of my coat. It was time to shed the skin. It was time to show them exactly who was signing the checks. The silence of the ladies' lounge was a stark contrast to the cacophony of the ballroom. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror and looked at the beige trench coat one last time. It was stained with the mud of the highway, the grease of the fried chicken, and the shame of the last 3 years. It was not just a piece of clothing, it was a shroud. It was the costume of a woman who apologized for existing. I reached for the top button. My fingers did not tremble. I undid them one by one, watching the fabric part. When the last button was free, I shrugged my shoulders. The coat slid down my arms and pooled on the marble floor in a heap of dirty tan fabric. I did not pick it up. I did not fold it. I kicked it into the corner under the sink where the trash belonged. I stood revealed. The midnight blue couture gown was a masterpiece of engineering and art. The crushed velvet bodice sculpted my torso like armor, while the silk skirt flowed down to my feet like a dark river. It shimmered under the vanity lights, capturing every photon and reflecting it back with a dangerous, predatory glow. I looked taller. I looked stronger. I looked like I owned the hotel, not just a room in it. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the velvet pouch. My hands moved with practiced elegance as I fastened the necklace around my throat. It was the cerulean tear, a string of rare blue diamonds that I had won at an auction in Geneva 2 years ago. Derek had spent $8,000 on a gold watch and thought he was rich. I was wearing $3 million around my neck, and I had not even touched my earrings yet. I put on the matching earrings, feeling the cold weight of the gems against my skin. They caught the light flashing with a brilliance that would blind anyone who looked too closely. Finally, I reached for the lipstick. Derek had told me to be neutral. He had told me to be invisible. I uncapped the tube. The color was vengeance red. It was dark, rich, and violent. I applied it slowly, tracing the curve of my lips with surgical precision. I pressed my lips together and smiled at my reflection. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a woman who had just planted a bomb and was walking away before the explosion. I grabbed a paper towel and wiped the submission from my eyes. I fixed a loose strand of hair, securing it with a diamond pin. The transformation was complete. Keisha the wife was dead. Keisha the CEO had taken the wheel. I turned away from the mirror. I could hear the muffled sounds of the orchestra through the heavy oak door. They were playing a waltz. It was fitting. I walked across the room, my heels clicking on the marble like the ticking of a clock. I did not reach for the handle. I was done asking for permission to enter rooms. I planted the sole of my Louboutin against the wood and kicked the door open. The heavy oak doors swung outward with a force that demanded attention, hitting the wall stops with a dull thud that cut through the ambient noise of the party. I stepped onto the plush carpet of the ballroom not as a guest, but as a natural disaster. The transformation was instantaneous. One head turned, then 5, then 50. The murmur of polite conversation died out, spreading like a wave of silence across the room, until the only sound was the clicking of my heels against the floor. Even the string quartet faltered, the cellist missing a beat, as his eyes drifted from the sheet music to the figure standing in the entryway. I walked down the center aisle. I did not look left or right. I fixed my gaze on the stage. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a wide path for me. These were the same people who had sneered at my trench coat 5 minutes ago. Now they stared with hungry, envious eyes, drinking in the sight of the midnight blue silk and the diamonds that blazed under the crystal chandeliers. They did not know who I was yet, but they knew power when they saw it. They smelled the money dripping off me, and they reacted with the reverence of true believers. I passed Derek. He was standing near the shrimp cocktail tower, his glass halfway to his mouth, frozen in midair. He squinted, his eyes narrowing in a mix of lust and confusion. He recognized the jawline. He recognized the walk, but his brain refused to process the data. He could not reconcile the mouse he had left in the corner with the lioness strutting past him. In his mind, Keisha was a frumpy burden who wore beige. This woman was a goddess who wore starlight. He took a step forward, his mouth opening to say something, perhaps a confused query or a drunken compliment. I did not break stride. I did not blink. I did not even acknowledge his existence. To me, he was just a statue in a museum I was about to burn down. I reached the stairs to the main stage, the current CEO. Mr. Sterling, the husband of the woman who had handed me her dirty glass, was waiting at the podium. He had received the notification 10 minutes ago. He was pale, his face shining with sweat. He looked like a man facing a firing squad. He met me at the bottom step and bowed. It was not a polite social bow. It was the bow of a conquered king surrendering his sword. He offered me his hand to help me up the stairs, but I ignored it. I ascended alone. I stood center stage, the lights blindingly bright against my eyes. I looked out at the sea of tuxedos and gowns. I saw Jessica in the back, her mouth hanging open in a perfect O of shock. I saw Derek pushing his way to the front, his face slowly draining of color as the realization began to take root. Mr. Sterling tapped the microphone. The feedback screech made everyone jump except me. He cleared his throat, his hands trembling visibly as he adjusted the stand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he stammered, his voice echoing nervously through the hall. "May I have your attention? There has been a slight change in the program tonight. It is my distinct honor to introduce the new majority shareholder and absolute owner of Vantage Group. Please put your hands together for your new chairman." He paused, looking at me with terror in his eyes, before turning back to the crowd. "Mrs. Keisha Williams." The spotlight hit me with the force of a physical blow, blinding me to the back of the room, but illuminating the front row with terrifying clarity. I stood behind the clear acrylic podium, my hands resting lightly on the edges. The microphone hummed with potential energy, waiting for my command. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the lungs of every man and woman present. They were not just watching a new owner take the stage. They were watching a ghost materialize in solid form. I took a breath, inhaling the scent of expensive perfume and fear. I did not rush. Power never rushes. I let my gaze sweep across the sea of faces. I saw the confusion. I saw the awe. And then I looked down. Directly in front of the stage, standing in the gap between the VIP tables, was Derek. He looked like a man who had been struck by lightning but was still standing due to rigor mortis. His face was drained of all blood, leaving his skin a sickly gray paste. His eyes were wide, bulging from their sockets as he tried to reconcile the two realities crashing in his brain. He was looking at his wife, the woman he had ordered to iron his cheap suit. But he was also looking at his boss, the woman who held his life in her manicured hands. His hand went slack. The flute of champagne he had been nursing slipped through his numb fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, violent crash. The crystal shattered, sending shards and liquid exploding outward across the polished shoes of the board members standing nearby. Derek did not flinch. He did not look down at the mess. He did not apologize. He was paralyzed. He was staring at me with the raw, unfiltered horror of a man realizing he has been sleeping next to a predator. He mouthed my name, but no sound came out. It was a silent plea for mercy. I locked eyes with him. I did not blink. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the cold, satisfied smile of a hunter who has finally cornered the wolf. I leaned forward toward the microphone. The sound of my breathing was amplified, filling the cavernous room. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice rich and steady, echoing off the gold leaf ceiling. The sound of my voice seemed to snap Derek out of his trance. He took a stumbling step back, nearly tripping over his own feet. He looked around wildly, hoping this was a prank, hoping someone would jump out and yell, "Cut!" But nobody moved. The nightmare was real. "Thank you for the warm welcome," I continued, keeping my eyes pinned on my husband. "I know this comes as a surprise to many of you. Change is often sudden. Change is often painful. But change is necessary when the foundation is rotten." I paused, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. "We have a lot of business to discuss tonight. I have acquisition papers to sign. I have a company to purge. But before we get to the boring legalities, I want to take a moment." I tilted my head slightly, staring directly into Derek's soul. "I want to tell you all a story. A funny story. Actually, it is my favorite story. It is about a man who thought he was a king, but forgot to check who owned the castle. There was a remote control resting on the podium next to my water glass. I picked it up. The weight of it felt significant. I did not look at the screen behind me. I did not need to. I lived that moment, and the scars on my knees were still healing under my gown. I pointed the remote at the massive LED wall that spanned the entire width of the stage. "Watch closely," I commanded. I pressed the button. The screen flickered to life. The resolution was crystal clear. It was footage taken from the dashcam of the Cadillac Escalade that had rescued me. But before the rescue, there was the crime. The audio system of the Grand Hotel was designed for symphonies, but tonight it played the soundtrack of domestic abuse. The sound of rain thundered through the ballroom, shaking the floorboards. Then came the voice. It was distorted by anger, but unmistakable. "Get out. You are useless. Walking will teach you some respect." The video showed the passenger door of a sedan flying open. It showed a woman being shoved out onto the wet asphalt. It showed her stumbling, tearing her dress, and falling into the mud. The camera zoomed in. The woman was me. The man screaming from the driver's seat was Derek. "Do not come back until you learn your place." The car in the video sped away, leaving the woman alone in the storm. The clip ended freezing on the image of my figure kneeling in the mud, illuminated only by the retreating taillights. The silence that followed was suffocating. 300 of Chicago's elite sat frozen in their chairs. The clinking of silverware stopped. The whispers died. The air in the room was sucked out, replaced by a collective gasp of pure, unadulterated shock. They were looking at a brutality that did not belong in their world of silk and champagne. They looked from the screen to me, and then they began to look around the room, searching for the monster who sounded so much like one of their own. I saw Mrs. Sterling cover her mouth with a napkin. I saw the board members exchange horrified glances. The facade of the respectable businessman was shattered. The video played on a loop in the silence, the sound of his cruelty echoing over and over again. I leaned into the microphone, my voice slicing through the tension like a scalpel. That video was taken 3 nights ago. That man left his wife to die on a highway because she dared to have an opinion. He drove away and used her credit card to buy flowers for his mistress. He came here tonight thinking he was going to be promoted. He thought he was a leader. He thought he was a man worthy of respect. I scanned the room until I found him. He was trembling so hard the table next to him was vibrating. He looked small. He looked weak. He looked exactly like what he was. I raised a single finger and pointed directly at him. The spotlight operator followed my gesture, cutting a beam of bright white light through the darkness to pin him like an insect on a board. The crowd recoiled from him as if he were contagious, creating a physical ring of isolation around him. That man is standing at table 5. I pressed the remote again. The image of the rainy highway vanished. In its place, a forensic accounting spreadsheet appeared on the massive screen. It was complex to the untrained eye, but to the bankers and investors in this room, it was as clear as a confession written in blood. Columns of red numbers cascaded down the display. You are looking at the quarterly budget for the Midwest Sales Division. I explained, my voice calm and analytical. Specifically, the marketing fund managed by Mr. Wilson. You will notice a recurring payment to a shell company listed as BB Consulting. I clicked the button. A new slide appeared showing a side-by-side comparison of the wire transfers and a dealership invoice. BB stands for Baby Boo, the contact name of his mistress. And those consulting fees, they did not pay for market research. They paid for a C-Class Mercedes-Benz. He stole $150,000 from this company. He stole from the shareholders. He stole from you. The room erupted. This was no longer a domestic dispute. This was corporate theft. I saw Mr. Henderson, the banker who had approved the predatory loan, stand up and glare at Derek with murderous intent. Derek was shaking his head violently, mouthing the word "no" over and over again, but the evidence was 40 feet tall and glowing in high definition. I did not stop there. I turned my gaze toward the back of the room where Jessica was trying to hide behind a waiter. But fraud seems to be a family tradition. I clicked the remote one last time. A split screen appeared. On the left was Jessica's bankruptcy filing. On the right were the financial records of the charity drive she had hosted last month. Mrs. Jessica Vance, you claim to be raising money for the local orphanage, but the audit trail shows that 80% of those donations went directly to American Express to service your personal credit card debt. You are not a philanthropist. You are a thief in rented sequins. Jessica let out a strangled cry, covering her face with her hands, as the people at her table physically recoiled, moving their chairs away from her as if she were radioactive. Derek could not take it anymore. The humiliation was total. The walls were closing in, and his narcissism shattered into a primal, violent rage. He did not run away. He snapped, his face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. He kicked his chair aside, sending it skidding across the floor. "She is lying," he screamed, his voice cracking. "It is a fake. It is AI generated. She is trying to frame me." He lunged forward. He pushed Mrs. Sterling out of his way, knocking the elderly woman into a table. He scrambled toward the stage, his eyes locked on my throat. He was not looking at a CEO anymore. He was looking at a wife who needed to be punished. "Shut up!" he roared, sprinting up the aisle. "I will make you shut up!" He hit the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. The crowd gasped. He reached the platform. His fist raised, his teeth bared, ready to strike the woman who had dared to expose him. Derek was 3 feet away from me. I could smell the sour stench of his sweat and the alcohol on his breath. His fist was raised in a clumsy arc, aimed directly at my face. He wanted to break me. He wanted to silence the voice that was tearing his life apart. The crowd screamed a collective sound of panic, but I did not flinch. I did not step back. I did not even blink. I knew something Derek did not. I knew that the man standing in the shadows was not just a driver. A split second before Derek could make contact, a blur of black fabric intercepted him. Marcus moved with a speed that the human eye struggled to track. He did not tackle Derek, he dismantled him. Marcus stepped between us, catching Derek's wrist in midair. The sound of the impact was a dull thud, followed immediately by a sharp, sickening crack as Marcus applied pressure to the joint. He used Derek's own momentum against him, spinning him around and wrenching his arm behind his back in a hammerlock that forced Derek to his knees. Derek screamed a high-pitched sound of agony that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. He dropped to the floor, his face pressed against the polished wood of the stage, just inches from the toes of my diamond-studded heels. Marcus stood over him, calm and immovable as a mountain. He did not look like a guest in a tuxedo anymore. He looked like a weapon. He applied just enough pressure to keep Derek paralyzed with pain. He leaned down, his voice a low rumble that carried clearly through the microphone that was still live. "Do not touch the chairman with those dirty hands." The sentence hung in the air, absolute and terrifying. Marcus looked up at the crowd, his face a mask of stone, daring anyone else to move. Derek whimpered, trying to struggle, but Marcus simply tightened his grip, forcing a gasp of air from Derek's lungs. I looked down at the man who used to terrorize me. He was groveling at my feet, held down by the employee he had mocked. The irony was perfect. "Get him off me!" Derek sobbed, his face wet with tears and snot. "You cannot do this. I am a vice president. I have rights." "You have nothing," I said, my voice cold. "You lost your rights when you forged my signature. You lost your rights when you shoved me out of a car. And you definitely lost your rights when you tried to assault me in front of 300 witnesses." Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the back of the room burst open again. But this time, it was not a grand entrance. It was an invasion. Red and blue lights flashed through the tall windows, painting the ballroom in the colors of emergency. The wail of sirens cut through the night, growing louder and closer, until they stopped right outside the main entrance. I looked at Derek's terrified eyes. "Do you hear that, Derek?" I asked. "That is your ride. And unlike the limousine you rented, this one is free." The tactical team moved with a synchronized precision that Marcus would have appreciated. 6 federal agents stormed the ballroom, their blue windbreakers emblazoned with yellow letters that spelled out the end of Derek's freedom: FBI. They did not stop to ask for invitations. They fanned out, sealing the exits and effectively turning the gala into a containment zone. The music had stopped completely, leaving only the sound of heavy boots on the parquet floor and the squawking of police radios. Marcus released his grip on Derek's arm and stepped back, nodding to the lead agent. He had done his job. Now it was the government's turn. 2 agents hauled Derek to his feet. He was limp, his legs refusing to support him. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The lead agent pulled a folded paper from his vest. "Derek Wilson, you are under arrest for wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, bank fraud, and embezzlement of corporate funds. You have the right to remain silent." Derek shook his head violently, sending sweat flying. "No," he stammered. "No. This is a misunderstanding. I am the vice president. You cannot do this. Check the files. It is a mistake." The handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The sound was sharp and final. Across the room, chaos erupted. Jessica had tried to make a run for the service exit, but she was not fast enough in her cheap heels. 2 female officers intercepted her. She was screaming, kicking, and flailing her arms like a toddler having a tantrum. "Get your hands off me," she shrieked. "Do you know who my boyfriend is? He will sue you. He will ruin you. You are under arrest for charity fraud and grand larceny, Ms. Vance," the officer stated calmly, spinning her around and cuffing her hands behind the back of her rented sequin dress. Derek watched his mistress being dragged away, and the reality of his situation finally pierced his delusion. He realized his title was gone, his car was gone, his freedom was gone. He looked around, desperately searching for a lifeline. His eyes landed on me. I was still standing on the stage, looking down at the wreckage of his life. For the first time in our marriage, he looked at me not with contempt, but with pathetic desperation. "Keisha," he screamed, pulling against the agents. "Baby, please. Tell them. Tell them we are married. Tell them I am a good man. You can fix this. You have the money now. Pay them off. He was crying now. Ugly, sobbing tears running down his face, mixing with the snot and the sweat. I did it for us, Keisha. I wanted to buy you nice things. I love you. Please do not let them take me. Save me. I am sorry. I was wrong. I swear I will change. I did not speak into the microphone. I placed it gently on the podium. The feedback clicked off, leaving his screams to echo in the silence. I gathered the skirt of my midnight blue gown and began to descend the stairs. I walked slowly. Every step was a sentence. I reached the bottom and walked over to where the agents were holding him. I stopped inches from his face. I could smell his fear. It smelled like justice. I looked at the man who had controlled every aspect of my life for 3 years. I looked for the love I used to feel. I looked for the fear I used to have. I found neither. I found nothing. I signaled the agent to wait a moment. Derek's eyes lit up with hope. He thought I was going to intervene. He thought I was going to write a check and make the bad men go away. Keisha, he whispered. Thank God. I leaned in close, so only he could hear me. I am not here to save you, Derek. I said, my voice soft and deadly. I just wanted to get a good look at you one last time. I wanted to remember exactly what you look like when you have nothing left to take from me. I straightened up and looked at the agents. Get this trash out of my hotel. The agents began to haul him backward, but Derek dug his heels into the carpet. A sudden spark of malicious clarity lit up his tear-filled eyes. He stopped begging for love and started begging for leverage. He realized that even if he went to prison, he was still legally my husband. He twisted his neck to look at me, his face contorted with a new kind of greed. Fine, he spat, his voice trembling with manic desperation. Arrest me, throw me in jail. I do not care. But remember this, Keisha. We are married. There is no divorce decree. That means half of everything you have is mine. Illinois is an equitable distribution state. Half that company is mine. Half those billions are mine. I will sue you from my cell. I will bleed you dry. You will be writing me checks for the rest of your life. He laughed, a wet, broken sound. You cannot get rid of me that easily. I am your partner whether you like it or not. I held up a hand. The agents paused, looking at me for instruction. I reached into the small interior pocket of my clutch. I did not pull out a weapon. I pulled out a piece of paper. It was old. The edges were yellowed and soft from age, and it had been folded into a tiny square. I unfolded it slowly, smoothing the creases with my thumb. I held it up so he could see the title at the top. Derek looked at the document. He squinted, trying to focus through his tears. Then his eyes went wide. His jaw went slack. The color that had returned to his face drained away, instantly leaving him looking like a corpse. Do you recognize this, Derek? I asked, my voice cutting through the room. He did not answer. He couldn't. Let me refresh your memory. 3 years ago, the night before our wedding, you made a scene. You were so paranoid. You were convinced I was after your assets. You forced me to sit at the kitchen table and sign a document you had downloaded from the internet. You were so worried about protecting your property. I took a step closer, holding the paper inches from his nose. You wanted to protect your 2012 Honda Civic. You wanted to make sure I could never touch your precious rust bucket or your collection of sneakers. You made me sign an ironclad prenuptial agreement stating that all assets acquired before and during the marriage would remain the sole property of the individual who earned them. You explicitly waived all rights to alimony. You explicitly waived all rights to shared marital property. I smiled. You called it insurance, Derek. You told me it was to keep me honest. Well, it worked. This piece of paper which you forced me to sign to save your junk car is now the only reason I get to keep my entire empire. I folded the paper and slipped it back into my purse. According to this contract which you notarized yourself, you are entitled to exactly what you brought into this marriage, which is nothing. You do not get half. You do not get a settlement. You do not get a single dime. Derek made a sound like a wounded animal. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had engineered his own poverty. He had signed away a fortune to protect a pittance. No, he wailed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched scream. No, I tear it up. Tear it up. It is not valid. I was under duress. I looked at the agents and nodded. Take him away. They yanked him backward. His feet dragged across the floor, leaving scuff marks on the wood. He thrashed and screamed, cursing me, cursing the law, cursing the day he met me. I have nothing, he screamed as they dragged him through the double doors. I have nothing. The doors slammed shut, cutting off his voice. The silence that followed was heavy and sweet. I stood alone in the center of the room. I was tired, I was vindicated, and I was completely free. The double doors of the Grand Hotel glided open with a silent electronic hum. I stepped out of the golden light of the lobby and into the night. The air was crisp and smelled of ozone. The sky, which had been threatening all evening, had finally broken. It was raining. It was not a gentle drizzle. It was a hard driving storm, the kind that floods basements and drowns out conversations. The water hammered against the pavement, creating a river that rushed along the curb. It was the exact same weather as the night Derek had pushed me out of the car. It was the same cold Chicago rain that had soaked into my bones while I knelt on the side of the highway, but tonight I did not feel the cold. Before a single drop could touch the velvet of my gown, a shadow moved at my periphery. A large black umbrella bloomed above my head, shielding me completely. Marcus stood beside me. He held the handle with a steady hand, his posture straight and protective. He was not just doing a job. He was guarding a life. "The car is ready, madame," he said, his voice cutting through the noise of the storm. "The heater is on." I looked at the black Maybach waiting at the curb. The engine was purring softly, a beast waiting for its master. Then I looked down at the rushing water in the gutter. It swirled dark and murky, carrying away the trash of the city. "One moment, Marcus," I said. I looked at my left hand. The streetlights reflected off the gold band on my ring finger. It was a simple ring. Derek had bought it at a pawn shop, claiming it was vintage when I knew it was just second-hand. For 3 years I had worn it like a shackle. I had polished it. I had been careful not to scratch it. I had honored the vow it represented, even when the man who gave it to me was busy breaking every promise he had ever made. I reached over with my right hand. The metal felt cold and foreign against my skin. I twisted it. It resisted for a fraction of a second, as if trying to hold on to the past, and then it slid free. I held it over the storm drain. The water roared below, hungry and deep. I did not say a prayer. I did not shed a tear. I simply opened my fingers. Gravity took over. The ring fell. It hit the metal grate with a tiny, insignificant ping that was instantly swallowed by the thunder. It vanished into the dark water, gone to join the rats and the filth where it belonged. I felt a physical weight lift from my chest. My hand felt light. My soul felt clean. "I am ready," I said. Marcus nodded and opened the rear door of the car. I slid into the leather interior. It was warm and smelled of new money and peace. The heavy door closed with a solid, reassuring thud, shutting out the rain and the world. Marcus got into the driver's seat. He looked at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes were kind. "Where to, madam?" he asked. I settled back into the seat and watched the rain streak against the tinted glass. I saw my reflection. I saw a woman who had walked through fire and come out made of steel. "Home, Marcus," I said. "The real one." The car pulled away from the curb, gliding effortlessly into the night, leaving the hotel, the sirens, and the past far behind in the rearview mirror. The tail lights glowed red in the mist for a moment, and then we were gone. Fade out. This story serves as a powerful reminder that silence should never be mistaken for weakness. Derek's ultimate downfall was not caused by external forces, but by his own blinding arrogance. He believed that being loud made him powerful, while he treated his greatest asset like a liability. Keisha teaches us that dignity is not negotiable and that strategic patience often cuts deeper than immediate rage. True strength is found in preparation, self-worth, and the courage to walk away when respect is no longer served. Always protect your peace and never sign away your future to someone who does not value your present. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of revenge and redemption.